The sun beat down mercilessly on the bustling streets of New York City as Maya Rodriguez arranged her small collection of bananas on a frayed blanket at the corner of Fifth Avenue. At 32, she had the weathered hands of someone much older, each crease telling stories of hardship and resilience. Despite losing her apartment last month after being laid off from her waitressing job, she maintained a warm smile for every passerby, her eyes reflecting a spirit unbroken by circumstance. Fresh bananas. Sweetest in the city, she called out, her voice carrying the melodic traces of her Dominican heritage. Her small corner stood in stark contrast to the gleaming Anderson Tower that loomed overhead, a monument to wealth and privilege that belonged to a world Maya could only glimpse through the reflective glass. Little did she know that on this sweltering Tuesday morning, her life would intersect with the tower's enigmatic owner in ways neither could have imagined. Inside the penthouse suite of Anderson Tower, Elijah Anderson paced alongside floor-to-ceiling windows, his custom Italian loafers leaving impressions in the plush carpet. At 38, he had amassed a fortune that landed him on the cover of Forbes for 3 consecutive years. His tech empire, Anderson Innovations, had revolutionized sustainable energy storage, making him not just wealthy but influential in global environmental policy. "I don't care what it takes, Harrison. I need those contracts signed by end of day," he barked into his phone, watching the miniature people scurrying below like ants. His dark eyes, usually sharp with determination, carried a weariness today, the burden of success without fulfillment weighing heavily on his shoulders. "Of course, Mr. Anderson," his executive assistant replied. "Your 10 a.m. with the Japanese investors is set. Your lunch with the mayor has been moved to 1 p.m., and cancel lunch," Elijah interrupted, loosening his tie. "I need to clear my head." The phrase had become increasingly common in recent weeks. Despite having everything money could buy, Elijah felt a gnawing emptiness that no acquisition could fill. His therapist called it existential ennui, his mother called it karma for working too much, his ex-fiancée, who left him 6 months ago, called it emotional unavailability. Whatever it was, it had driven him to take increasingly frequent walks among the real people, as he called them, those untouched by the isolating bubble of extreme wealth. "Very well, sir," Harrison responded, used to his boss's unpredictable moods. "Shall I have security accompany you?" Elijah scoffed, "So I can look like even more of a disconnected billionaire?" "No thank you. I'll be fine." As he hung up and grabbed his sunglasses, designer but inconspicuous enough, he had no idea that his impromptu escape would lead him directly to a banana seller with a smile that would change everything he thought he knew about value, connection, and what it truly means to be rich. Elijah stepped out of his private elevator into the lobby, nodding curtly at the doorman who scrambled to attention. The blast of humid summer air hit him as he pushed through the revolving doors, momentarily disorienting him. After the climate-controlled perfection of Anderson Tower that he walked aimlessly, his mind churning with projections, acquisitions, and the hollow victory of another billion-dollar quarter. Lost in thought, he nearly collided with a hurried businessman who shot him an irritated glare, not recognizing the face behind the sunglasses as the man who owned half the block. "Sorry," Elijah muttered, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. When was the last time he had apologized to anyone? In his world, mistakes were handled by legal teams and PR statements. As he rounded the corner, the sweet scent of ripening fruit caught his attention. His stomach growled, reminding him that he'd skipped breakfast for an early conference call with London. Following the aroma, his eyes landed on a modest display of bananas arranged with surprising artistry on a worn blanket. Maya noticed the tall figure approaching and straightened her shoulders, putting on her brightest smile despite having sold only 3 bananas in the past 2 hours. "Good morning, sir. Looking for something sweet to brighten your day?" she called out with practiced cheerfulness. Elijah paused, struck by the genuine warmth in her voice, a stark contrast to the practiced deference he usually encountered. Up close, he noticed her threadbare clothes and the small backpack beside her that seemed to contain her worldly possessions. Yet there was a dignity in her posture that commanded respect. "Just these bananas?" he asked, gesturing to her simple display. Maya nodded. "The very best. I get them from Mr. Guzman at the market. He saves the ripest ones for me." She patted the spot beside her. They're perfect for a hot day like this. Full of potassium and good energy. Something about her unapologetic pride in her humble offering intrigued him. Elijah found himself sitting down on the edge of the blanket, ignoring the curious glances from pedestrians seeing a man in a $3,000 suit perched on the sidewalk. "I'll take one," he said, reaching for his wallet. $2, Maya replied, selecting the perfect banana with the care a sommelier might choose a fine wine. Elijah pulled out a crisp $100 bill, the smallest denomination he had. "Sorry, don't have anything smaller." Maya's eyes widened briefly before she shook her head. "I can't make change for that." "Keep it," he said casually. Her expression shifted from surprise to something that looked remarkably like pity. "No, thank you. I don't take charity." $2 for a banana, or no sale. Elijah stared at her, genuinely confused. In his experience, everyone had a price, and that price always adjusted to accommodate whatever he was willing to pay. The refusal of his generosity, no, his carelessness with money, he corrected himself, was unprecedented. "I don't have $2, he admitted, the absurdity of the situation hitting him. Maya studied him for a moment, then broke into a laugh, a real one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Well, Mr. Fancy Suit, seems like you're the one who needs charity today." She handed him the banana anyway. "Consider it a gift. Maybe tomorrow you can bring exact change." The assumption that he would return tomorrow, that this sidewalk transaction was somehow the beginning of an ongoing relationship rather than a one-time curiosity, startled him. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted further down the street. A police officer was approaching vendors without permits, sending people scattering. "Time to relocate," Maya sighed, quickly gathering her blanket and fruit with practiced efficiency. "Enjoy your banana, sir." As she hurried away, backpack slung over one shoulder and fruit cradled in her arms, Elijah found himself holding the gifted banana and feeling, for the first time in years, like he'd been given something priceless. The realization that he didn't even know her name struck him with unexpected force. Biting into the banana, he was surprised to discover it was indeed the sweetest he'd ever tasted, or perhaps it was the encounter that had sweetened the experience. Either way, as he walked back to his tower, he found himself wondering where she might have relocated to, and whether she'd be there tomorrow. And for the first time in months, he looked forward to tomorrow for reasons entirely unrelated to business. True to an impulse he didn't fully understand, Elijah returned to the same corner the following day. He'd told his assistant he was taking a walking lunch, something so out of character that Harrison had momentarily suspected an imposter on the phone. This time, he came prepared with a crisp $2 bill tucked into his pocket. Maya wasn't there. He felt a disproportionate disappointment as he scanned the surrounding area, wondering if she'd found another spot nearby to sell her bananas. After 15 minutes of wandering, something Elijah Anderson simply did not do, he reluctantly headed back toward Anderson Tower, puzzled by his own investment in finding a homeless banana seller he'd spoken to for all of 3 minutes. As he approached the service entrance of his building, he spotted her sitting with her back against the wall, her small collection of fruit arranged beside her, engaged in animated conversation with the building's maintenance staff who appeared to be on their break. "The banana lady returns," he said, approaching with more casualness than he felt. Maya looked up, recognition dawning in her eyes. "Mr. $100 bill. I see you survived your banana experience." The maintenance workers, recognizing their boss despite his attempt at incognito dress down, which for Elijah meant no tie, quickly stood and nodded respectfully before making excuses to return to work. "You scared away my customers," Maya observed, gesturing to the retreating workers. "They're my employees." "They're still potential banana buyers," she countered with a shrug. "Everyone gets hungry." Elijah sat down beside her, earning curious glances from people entering and exiting the building. "I brought exact change today," he said, producing the $2 bill. Maya's face lit up. "A $2 bill? These are good luck, you know." She accepted it reverently. "Mayabwela used to collect them," said. Each one carried the story of everyone who had held it before. She handed him a banana, then studied his face more carefully. "You look familiar without your sunglasses. Do I know you from somewhere?" For a moment, Elijah considered lying. Something about the normalcy of their interaction felt too precious to contaminate with his identity. But something in her direct gaze compelled honesty. "I'm Elijah Anderson. This is my building." Maya's eyebrows shot up, then she laughed. "Well, that explains why those guys ran off like they'd seen a ghost." She extended her hand. "Maya Rodriguez. Banana entrepreneur." Her lack of fawning or immediate change in behavior was refreshing. As they sat sharing bananas, their conversation flowed with surprising ease. Maya told him about losing her apartment after her roommate moved out unexpectedly and the restaurant where she worked closed. How she'd been sleeping in shelters while trying to save enough for a security deposit on a new place. "The banana business isn't making you rich?" he asked, immediately regretting his tone-deaf question, but Maya just chuckled. "Not exactly. But it keeps me in control of my day. No bosses, no schedules. Just me and my fruit." She gestured expansively, as though presenting an empire rather than a small pile of bananas. "And I meet interesting people. Like billionaires slumming it on their lunch breaks." "I'm not slumming it," Elijah protested. "I'm reconnecting. With bananas? With reality," he admitted. "Everything in my world is so curated. Managed. Artificial." Maya considered this. "Must be nice, though. Having everything." "Everything except authenticity," he replied, surprising himself with his candor. "Everyone wants something from me." "I just want $2 for a banana," Maya said simply. Fair exchange. Over the next 2 weeks, Elijah found himself creating excuses to escape his office around the same time each day. Maya became a constant, waiting by the service entrance with her bananas and stories that transported him far from spreadsheets and shareholder expectations. She told him about growing up in Washington Heights, about her grandmother's recipes and her dreams of opening a small fruit stand that would grow into a proper shop someday. He found himself sharing things too: the pressure of inheriting his father's company, the loneliness of a position where vulnerability was viewed as weakness, his growing disillusionment with accumulating wealth that brought no joy. On a particularly hot afternoon, 3 weeks into their unlikely friendship, Elijah arrived to find Maya looking dejected, her usual display reduced to just 3 bananas. "What happened?" he asked, settling beside her. "Got chased away from my usual market spot. Missed getting the good delivery from Mr. Guzman." She sighed, wiping sweat from her brow. "Some days are just harder than others." Without thinking, Elijah pulled out his phone. "I can help. I can call someone." Maya placed her hand firmly on his, stopping him. "That's not why I tell you things, Elijah. I'm not looking for you to solve my problems." "Then what are you looking for?" he asked, genuinely curious. She thought for a moment. "Just someone who sees me. Not as a charity case or a business opportunity. Just Maya." The simplicity of her answer struck him deeply. When was the last time anyone had wanted nothing more from him than his presence? Even his last relationship had been entangled with business connections and social climbing. "I see you, Maya," he said quietly. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of a connection that defied the boundaries of their vastly different worlds. As July melted into August, Elijah found himself living for his daily escapes to Maya's corner. Inside Anderson Tower, rumors circulated about the CEO's increasingly frequent disappearances, with theories ranging from secret cancer treatments to clandestine corporate negotiations. Only Harrison knew the truth, having once followed his boss at a discreet distance, concerned about his unusual behavior. He'd reported back to the board that Mr. Anderson was simply taking walks to clear his head, omitting the detail about the homeless banana seller who seemed to capture more of the billionaire's attention than their last 3 executive meetings combined. On a stormy Tuesday, Elijah sat in a tense meeting with his executive team, half listening to presentations about quarterly projections while watching rain lash against the windows. His thoughts drifted to Maya, wondering if she had shelter from the downpour. Mr. Anderson. Your thoughts on the Jakarta expansion, his CFO prompted. Elijah straightened. Proceed with the environmental impact studies before we commit. The answer seemed to satisfy them, but as the meeting continued, his distraction grew. When thunder cracked loudly overhead, he abruptly stood. Continue without me. Harrison has my proxy on any votes. Ignoring their bewildered expressions, he left the boardroom and headed for the elevator, texting his driver to meet him with an umbrella. The rational part of his brain registered that his behavior was becoming erratic, potentially damaging to shareholder confidence if word got out, but he couldn't shake his concern for Maya. By the time he reached their usual meeting spot, he was drenched despite the umbrella. The service entrance was deserted, no sign of Maya or her fruit. For an hour, he searched nearby areas where she sometimes relocated when moved along by security or police. Finally, soaked and worried, he entered a small diner where they had occasionally shared coffee when the weather was uncooperative. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, drawing the attention of the few patrons seeking refuge from the storm. Elijah? Maya's voice came from a corner booth where she sat with a single cup of coffee, her backpack beside her, looking small and tired. Relief washed over him as he slid into the booth across from her. I was worried when you weren't at our usual spot. Didn't think you'd come out in this weather, she said, gesturing to the window where rain continued to pour. Even bananas aren't worth pneumonia. It's not about the bananas, he said simply. The waitress approached, eyeing Elijah's soaked designer clothes suspiciously before taking his order for coffee. You look terrible, Maya observed once the waitress left. Everything okay in Billionaire land? Just the usual empire building, he replied with a forced smile. What about you? Did you find a dry place for tonight? Maya's expression faltered slightly before she recovered. The shelter on 23rd has space. If I get there by 6. The clock on the diner wall read 5:15 p.m. Outside, the rain had intensified. I have guest rooms, Elijah said suddenly. Several, actually. You could stay until the storm passes. Maya's expression hardened. I told you before I don't want your charity. It's not charity. He hesitated, searching for the right words. It's what friends do. Friends with empty guest rooms in penthouses, she replied skeptically. The waitress returned with his coffee, casting another curious glance between the odd pair, the disheveled man in expensive clothes and the woman with a backpack full of belongings, before moving away. Maya, Elijah leaned forward, I have more rooms than I know what to do with. Rooms that sit empty while you sleep on shelter cots. How does that make sense? Because crossing that line changes things, she replied, her voice quiet but firm. Right now, we're just two people who talk and share bananas. If I start accepting your help, then what am I? Your project. Your good deed. Your kept woman. The last suggestion hit Elijah like a slap. That's not your intention, she finished for him. I know. But intentions don't change how the world works. Rich men don't invite homeless women to their penthouses without everyone assuming things. Her words hung between them, uncomfortable in their truth. Elijah hadn't considered how such an invitation might be perceived both by Maya and by others. The simple solution he offered carried implications he hadn't thought through. I just want you to be safe, he said finally. And I need to stay independent, she countered. That's how I survive, Elijah. By relying on myself. Before he could respond, the diner door burst open as a group of drenched teenagers tumbled in, laughing and shaking water everywhere. In the momentary distraction, Maya grabbed her backpack. I should head to the shelter before all the spots fill up, she said, sliding out of the booth. At least let me drive you, Elijah offered, reaching for his phone. Maya hesitated, then nodded. Okay. That I can accept. In the back seat of his Bentley, they rode in silence, the gulf between their worlds seeming wider than ever despite the physical proximity. When they arrived at the shelter, Maya turned to him. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes I think we're both homeless in our own ways. Me without walls, you without connections." Before he could respond, she slipped out into the rain and disappeared through the shelter doors, leaving Elijah with a hollow feeling that no amount of wealth could fill. That night, as he moved through his empty penthouse with its perfect views and soulless designer furniture, Elijah realized Maya was right. He had built walls of wealth and privilege that kept people out as effectively as homelessness kept Maya on society's margins. Both of them existed outside the normal world, looking in from opposite sides of the glass. For the first time in his adult life, Elijah Anderson wondered if he had built the wrong kind of success. The day after the storm, Maya wasn't at their usual meeting spot. Nor the day after that. As 1 week stretched into 2, Elijah found himself distracted during meetings, checking his phone constantly, and taking increasingly long walks around the neighborhood. Harrison finally approached him as he stared out the window of his office, the untouched lunch tray beside him growing cold. "Sir, the board is concerned. You've missed 2 important calls with investors, and the Jakarta team is still waiting for your final approval." Elijah continued gazing at the street below. "Have you ever felt like you built your life on the wrong foundation, Harrison?" His assistant blinked, unprepared for such a philosophical question. "I can't say that I have, sir. I have everything. And it means nothing." Elijah turned to face him. "Do you know where she is?" "The banana seller." Harrison's carefully neutral expression confirmed what Elijah suspected. His assistant knew exactly who he was talking about. "I believe she was offered a position at the Rodriguez Bodega on 168th Street, sir. A family business, though I understand the connection is distant." Of course Harrison would know. It was his job to know everything that might impact Elijah's performance. "Thank you, Harrison." Elijah straightened his tie. "Reschedule the Jakarta call for tomorrow. I'll be out for the rest of the day." The bodega was a small, vibrant space wedged between a laundromat and a cell phone repair shop. The moment Elijah stepped inside, the artificial cool of corporate America fell away, replaced by the rich aromas of fresh produce, spices, and the unmistakable scent of authenticity. Behind the counter, Maya arranged a display of plantains, her back to the door. She wore a simple apron over her clothes, still modest but no longer threadbare. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she hummed as she worked, unaware of his presence. For a moment, Elijah simply watched her, struck by how naturally she fit into this environment of real people and honest work. The bell above the door jingled as another customer exited, causing Maya to turn. "Welcome to Rodriguez Bod," the greeting died on her lips as she recognized him. "Elijah. You disappeared," he said simply, approaching the counter. "I got an opportunity," she replied, gesturing around. "My third cousin's place. He needed help, and I needed a job with a steady paycheck." "And a place to stay?" Elijah asked, noticing the healthier glow to her skin, the restfulness in her eyes that came from regular meals and safe sleep. She nodded. "Small room upstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. For now, at least." An older man emerged from the back room, eyeing Elijah with the natural suspicion reserved for men in $2,000 suits in neighborhood bodegas. "Everything okay, Maya?" he asked in Spanish-accented English. "Yes, T.O. This is a friend." "Elijah, this is my cousin Ricardo." The men exchanged nods, Ricardo's expression making it clear that friends in expensive suits were to be watched carefully. "I'll be in the back," Ricardo said, disappearing but leaving the door conspicuously ajar. "You look good," Elijah said once they were relatively alone. "Settled." "You look terrible," Maya countered with her characteristic directness. "Are you sleeping?" He shrugged. "Work has been demanding." "Liar," she said, but without heat. "You run the company. You decide how demanding it is." An elderly woman approached the counter with a small basket of groceries, and Maya efficiently rang her up, chatting warmly in Spanish as she bagged the items. Elijah stepped aside, watching the easy interaction with something like envy. When had his own work ever brought him that kind of simple human connection? After the customer left, Maya turned back to him. "So, did you need something?" "We have excellent bananas," she added with a small smile. "I missed our talks," he admitted. "The bananas too, but mostly the talks." Maya's expression softened. "I miss them too. But this is better for me, Elijah. Structure. Purpose. Independence." "I understand," he said, though the words felt inadequate. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "Better than okay," she assured him. "For the first time in months, I can see a future again. Ricardo says if I learn the business, I might be able to manage the new location he's thinking about opening next year." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and Elijah felt a complicated mix of happiness for her and an unexpected sense of loss. Their worlds, briefly intersected during her time of crisis, were separating again as she found her footing. "That's wonderful," he said sincerely. "You deserve it." Maya studied him for a moment. "And what about you? Still feeling trapped in your tower?" Her question pierced directly to the heart of his recent malaise. In the weeks since their last meeting, Elijah had moved through his days mechanically, more aware than ever of the hollowness of his achievements. "I've been thinking about making some changes," he admitted. "What kind of changes?" she asked, arranging fruit as they talked. "I don't know exactly. Something more meaningful." He struggled to articulate the shift happening within him. "When my father built the company, it was to create something that mattered, technology that could help people. Somewhere along the way, it became about stock prices and market share. So change it back," Maya said simply, as though redirecting a multi-billion-dollar corporation was as easy as rearranging bananas. "It's not that simple. Isn't it? You're the boss." Before he could respond, Ricardo emerged again, pointedly checking his watch. "Maya, delivery coming in 10 minutes. She nodded. "I should get back to work," she told Elijah. "But it was good to see you." The finality in her tone made it clear that this was goodbye, not just for now, but perhaps for good. Their brief connection, forged in the unusual circumstance of her homelessness and his existential crisis, had served its purpose for both of them. "Could I come back sometime? Maybe when you're off work?" Elijah asked, not ready to let go. Maya considered him thoughtfully. "Why?" "Because I value your perspective," he said honestly. "Because talking to you makes me see things differently." "I'm not your spiritual guide, Elijah," she said gently. "You don't need me to figure out your life." "Maybe not," he agreed. "But I'd like you in it anyway." The simple declaration hung between them, charged with possibilities neither had acknowledged before. After a moment, Maya picked up a ripe banana from the display and handed it to him. "Thursday evenings I finish at 7. There's a diner around the corner that makes decent coffee." Elijah accepted the banana, recognition of their ritual bringing a genuine smile to his face for the first time in weeks. "I'll be there." As he walked back to his waiting car, peeling the banana that tasted of new beginnings, Elijah felt lighter than he had in years. Maya had found her path forward. Perhaps it was time he rediscovered his point. 6 months later, the headline of the Wall Street Journal's business section read, "Anderson Innovations shifts focus, Billionaire CEO launches affordable housing initiative." The accompanying photo showed Elijah at a groundbreaking ceremony, shovel in hand, his usual impeccable suit replaced by a more casual button-down and jeans. The article detailed how Anderson Innovations was redirecting 30% of its R&D budget toward developing sustainable, low-cost housing solutions, beginning with a pilot program in New York City. What the article didn't show was Maya standing just out of frame, now the manager of Rodriguez Bodega's new location, a spacious corner store that specialized in fresh produce and locally sourced goods. The bodega had become the unofficial community center for the neighborhood, hosting job fairs, financial literacy workshops, and providing a dignified shopping experience in an area previously dominated by liquor stores and fast food. On this crisp December evening, Maya locked up the store and crossed the street to where Elijah waited, leaning against his car, no longer the ostentatious Bentley but a more practical electric vehicle. "Ready?" he asked, opening the door for her. "For my first board meeting?" "Not remotely," Maya replied, sliding into the passenger seat. "Remind me again why I agreed to this." "Because the Anderson Housing Initiative needs board members who actually understand what affordable housing should look like," Elijah said, getting in beside her. "And because you've never been afraid to tell me when my ideas are terrible." Maya laughed, adjusting the folder of notes she'd prepared. In the months since their reconnection, their relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted: a partnership that bridged their different worlds while respecting the unique perspectives each brought to the table. They weren't a couple in the romantic sense, though the speculation ran rampant in gossip columns. Instead, they'd formed something perhaps more revolutionary, a genuine friendship between economic opposites, based on mutual respect and a shared vision for a more equitable community. "Your investors still hate this project, don't they?" Maya asked as they drove toward Anderson Tower. "Some do," Elijah admitted. "The quarterly numbers aren't as impressive when we're investing in long-term social impact rather than immediate returns. But public sentiment is shifting. The partnerships with local businesses have generated goodwill we couldn't buy with any advertising campaign." Maya smiled, thinking of how her cousin's bodega now supplied fresh fruit for all Anderson Innovations events, a small contract that had nevertheless allowed Ricardo to hire 2 more employees from the neighborhood. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when we first met, I never would have pictured us here." "You mean you didn't look at the homeless banana seller and see a future corporate advisor?" Elijah teased. "How short-sighted of you." "Almost as short-sighted as a billionaire not carrying small bills," she countered with a smirk. As they pulled into the private garage beneath Anderson Tower, Maya felt the familiar flutter of imposter syndrome. Despite Elijah's assurances, board meetings with corporate executives and major shareholders remained intimidating territory. "Remember," Elijah said, sensing her nervousness as they rode the elevator upward, "you're not here as my charity project or my token diversity hire. You're here because you understand community needs better than anyone else in that room. Your perspective is invaluable." The elevator doors opened directly into the conference room where board members were already gathered. Conversations quieted as Maya entered alongside Elijah, her simple but professional attire a stark contrast to their designer suits. "Ms. Rodriguez, welcome," Harrison greeted her warmly, having become an unexpected ally in recent months. "Your proposal on incorporating community gardens into the housing designs has generated considerable interest." As the meeting progressed, Maya found her voice, articulating the practical needs of residents with a clarity that cut through corporate jargon. When questioned about costs, she countered with examples of long-term savings generated by community investment. When challenged on timeline expectations, she pointed out seasonal considerations that the developers had overlooked. Watching her command the room, Elijah felt a surge of pride, not in himself for discovering her, but in her for seizing every opportunity to amplify her inherent capabilities. After the meeting, as board members filed out, an elderly board member approached Elijah. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "He always said Anderson Innovations should build more than wealth. You're returning to the company's roots." The words hit Elijah with unexpected force. All his life, he'd measured himself against his father's financial success, never considering that the original vision had been about impact rather than profit margins. Later, as they sat on the balcony of his penthouse now redesigned with warm woods and comfortable furnishings rather than the sterile minimalism of before, Elijah shared the comment with Maya. "Do you think it's true," he asked, "that I'm honoring his legacy?" Maya considered the question seriously, as she did all matters. "I think you're creating your own legacy now. One that acknowledges your privilege but uses it purposefully." She gestured toward the city lights spread below them. "You still live differently than most people ever will, Elijah. You still have power I'll never have. But you're learning to listen to voices that wealth usually drowns out. That matters. The simple validation meant more coming from her than from any business publication or financial analysis. None of this would have happened without you, he said. Maya shook her head firmly. Don't give me credit for your growth. I was just the messenger who delivered a $2 banana with a side of perspective. Best investment I ever made, Elijah replied with a smile. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the city that had brought them together through such improbable circumstances, both recognized how their unlikely friendship had transformed not just their individual lives but rippled outward to affect hundreds of others. The poor homeless banana seller hadn't just stolen the heart of a handsome billionaire she had reminded him he had won in the first place. And in finding his heart again, Elijah Anderson had discovered that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars, but in connections, purpose, and the courage to build bridges across the economic divide. In a city defined by its extremes, they had created something revolutionary, a friendship that refused to be limited by class boundaries, proving that sometimes the most valuable exchanges begin with something as simple as a $2 banana.